Okay, everybody, welcome back to the online video lecture series for Philosophy 102 Ethics. Today we're going to jump back into talking about Kant's moral theory, and we're going to do so by looking at the first section of his groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. But before we do that, we should recap a few points from last time where we were really focusing on Kant's comments in the preface to that work. And there were a few major takeaway points that I was trying to make regarding what he says in the preface. So the first is that Kant is a moral absolutist. He thinks that there are certain moral rules, and really, actually, he thinks for any rule or any command to qualify as a moral rule, it has to be the sort of rule that is followed unconditionally. It has to be the sort of rule that you are required to follow no matter what. And this makes him significantly different from a utilitarian or consequentialist like John Stuart Mill. Although, for instance, John Stuart Mill does think in the vast majority of cases it's wrong to lie. He thinks in the vast majority of cases, if you lie, it'll produce worse consequences, even if you can't see them in the moment. And on a society-wide scale, it would be very bad to have a lot of people lying. But Mill has to admit that there are certain circumstances in which it is actually morally acceptable, and it's the morally right thing to do to tell a lie. If you knew that telling the truth would cause more pain and suffering, would produce less happiness in the world than telling a lie, then telling a lie is what you should do. And this is a really significant difference between Mill and Kant, because on the issue of lying and really any other moral rule, Kant is an absolutist in that he thinks it is never acceptable to break those rules. So that was one of the first points that we saw from the preface. The other was Kant has a specific conception of the human person. And specifically, he thinks the human person is fundamentally different than any other sort of being in the universe. And what is it that makes the human person fundamentally different? It is possession of what he calls a will. And because, as you can see from the title of today's lecture, we're going to be talking about the good will, this is a concept we need to recap. So what does it mean to have a will? So to have a will just means to have the ability to form an intention to act. So, for instance, let's say you're hungry. You say, okay, I'm going to make a plan. I'm going to intend to make a salad. You make the salad, you act on it, and then you eat the salad. Right? It was your will that allowed you to form the intention or goal of making the salad. And when you do that, notice that you're exercising your capacity for choice. And this is what Kant thinks makes the will so much different from any other being. An animal like a dog or a cat, or, man-made objects like cars or computers, or just natural objects like rocks and trees. A lot of these objects can move and act in a certain way. A car can move, a tree can grow, a dog can run. But in Kant's view, all of these actions are either sort of programmed in some sense, or they're done by instinct. So, we would say certainly the way in which a computer acts or a car acts is different from the way a dog acts. The way a computer or a car acts is literally just human beings have programmed it to run in a certain way. They've set it up to run in a certain way, and literally under a human being's control. A dog doesn't seem like that, but for Kant, what is ruling or controlling a dog is just its natural instincts. A dog and all other animals just do what they're instinctively sort of born to do. But it's only the human being, and specifically any rational beings, any beings with the ability to reason, that have a will. We can think about what we want to do, we can consider different options, we can form plans and intentions. And that for Kant is what makes you fundamentally different. As I explained last time, it puts you on the edge of nature, because on the one hand, you are a physical body, you're subject to the laws of nature, you have natural instincts just like animals do. On the other hand, though, you have a will, you have reason, you can think and deliberate, and if you think and deliberate properly, you can even attain, in Kant's view, freedom. Okay, so these are points we're going to want to keep in mind, because in the first section, he's going to take these ideas, or he's really going to show you how he argues to these ideas. And the way he starts in the first section is just the way you might expect. It's similar to how Aristotle began and similar to how Mill began. Both Aristotle and Mill began with attempting to determine what is the highest good. So Aristotle said it was eudaimonia, which you understand as human flourishing. It's a properly functioning human being with all the virtues. That's the highest good. And in our translation, they called eudaimonia happiness. Now, Mill also says happiness is the highest good, but he has a different conception. For Mill, happiness isn't, the sort of eudaimonistic conception that Aristotle held. He doesn't have this sort of view of a properly functioning human being in the universe. Mill just says happiness is pleasure in the absence of pain. So Aristotle and Mill both started with the same question: what is this highest good? And they gave similar, but not exactly the same sort of answers. Kant also begins by asking the same question. He asks, what is the highest good? And the way he describes it is an unconditional good. And here's the way he talks about it at the very beginning. It is impossible to think of anything at all in the world, or indeed even beyond it, that could be taken good without limitation except a good will. And this idea of a good will is the foundational concept we need to explore today. Okay, so in this first sentence, he's implying a distinction between conditional goods and unconditional goods, right? Because he says, well, certain goods are goods without limitation, which means there must be some other goods that are good but have limitations to them. And so we'll call conditional goods things that are good under certain circumstances. Maybe many times they're good, but there are some circumstances where they're not good. But an unconditional good is something that's good no matter what, in all circumstances, under all conditions. So, of course, if we're looking for the highest good, as you might expect, what Kant thinks the highest good is going to be is whatever this unconditional good is. What is something we can say is good no matter what? And the way he goes about this is actually to start saying, well, what are some things that wouldn't qualify as an unconditional good? What are some things we would have to say are merely conditional goods? All right. Now, so what examples does he come up with? So he goes on to say, understanding, wit, judgment, and whatever else talents of the mind may be called, or confidence, resolve, and persistency of intent, as qualities of temperament, are no doubt in many respects good and desirable, but they can also be extremely evil and harmful if the will that is to make use of these gifts of nature, and whose distinctive constitution is therefore called character, is not good. It is just the same with gifts of fortune. Power, riches, honor, even health, and the entire well-being and contentment with one's condition, under the name of happiness, inspire confidence and thereby quite often overconfidence as well, unless a good will is present to correct and make generally purposive their influence on the mind, and with it also the whole principle for acting. Okay, so he identifies in this passage a number of conditional goods. He talks about talents of the mind, things like understanding, wit, and judgment. Qualities of temperament, things like confidence, resolve. You could put courage here, the ability to face danger, the ability to face opposition, the ability to not give up, persistency of intent. Gifts of fortune, power, riches, honor, health, well-being, contentment, and happiness. All of these things, he says, are conditional goods. And let's think about why that would be for a second. Why would something like understanding, wit, or judgment, talents of the mind, be just a conditional good? Well, certainly we praise these things. We say, wow, that person's really smart, they're really intelligent, and it's very advantageous in life to be intelligent and have these talents of the mind. On the other hand, of course, it's not hard to think about how, in the wrong hands, these sorts of talents could actually be very bad. So we can imagine, a criminal of average ability would be a criminal of extraordinary ability with the right sort of intelligence. They might be able to engage in petty crime with just average intelligence, but with extraordinary intelligence, maybe they can engage in widespread crime. The same with qualities of temperament, confidence, resolve, persistency of intent. All the qualities that make you a sort of tenacious and a tenacious person who knows what they want and is not going to give up. The qualities that make you a good student, a good employee, a good person, in your social relationships, in your personal life. All these sorts of qualities could also make you an excellent criminal. You say, well, that criminal scheme didn't work out the first time, but I'm not going to give up. I'm going to be persistent. And then what about gifts of fortune? It's not hard at all to see how power, riches, and honor and wealth could be used for good or bad purposes. Now, you notice there's a few I didn't quite mention yet. Kant, and we'll come back to this, but Kant says well-being, contentment, and happiness are also conditional goods. I want to come back to that, so I'll just flag that and leave that alone for the moment. But if you look at all the other things on this list, it's not hard to see, like in the wrong hands, these could be bad qualities. So notice Kant says, well, how can we prevent this? How can we prevent these talents of mind and qualities of temperament and gifts of fortune? How can we prevent these from being used poorly? And his point is that what we need is a good will.